This woman asked a question is if, as the male loneliness epidemic increases, are we going to see an uptick in basically pedophilic behavior? Hi, my name is Dr. Natalie Jones, and I've spent several years working with sex offenders as well as other types of predators through corrections and other types of settings. I'd like to address this question, and it just from my experience in working with men who are pedophiles and loneliness, I think it actually kind of happens in reverse. Most pedophiles I know are usually people that are alone, and even if they are married with families, and I'll definitely get into this. So in my experience, people develop pedophilia um, from a myriad of places, all of which typically involves them being alone and unsupervised. So a lot of men that I've worked with in the past that have a history of being pedophiles, they may have experienced sexual trauma from a young age. That's one way. They definitely spend a lot of time alone and caught up in fantasy. So it's not uncommon for people like that to spend hours playing graphic and violent video games, watching television, or accessing pornography. So things that are very fantasy based, but can also have components of violence to them. And a lot of times, again, they're doing this alone in secret, even as young children, and they're often left alone, unsupervised for long periods of time by their parents. So it's also not uncommon for these people, for these men to have been latchkey children. And that's not to say all latchkey children are like that, but just in my experience, I've worked with a lot of men who, again, came home, spent several hours alone, and were left unsupervised. Another component which fuels imagination and impulsivity is drugs and alcohol. A lot of the men, one specific drug in particular. A lot of men would sort of say, well, I wouldn't have, did what I did had I not been on this one particular drug. And one drug that increases causes someone to be hypersexual and super impulsive is methamphetamines. So it's also not uncommon for sex offenders to try to fill that void and emotionally numb, it just sort of allows them to escape into fantasy land even further by abusing substances. And over time, a lot of them just become preoccupied with the idea of having sex, of having control, and having dominance because they're used to, again, escaping in fantasy without having connection. And so connection seems very foreign to them and they don't like it. Despite this, you will find that some men and women too, because there are female pedophiles as well as transgender pedophiles. I've worked with all three. And so what you will find is even if they get married and they have children, they're not in fantastic marriages. A lot of these marriages are out of obligation or used as just a cover. A lot of times they're very abusive to their spouse, or they are very neglectful to their spouse and their children, meaning that, if they're home, they're not emotionally present, they don't have a strong connection, or they may be physically gone all of the time. So it's not uncommon for men to be married and have their wife in another state or in a long distance, in another location that's long distance, or just something where they're constantly on the road all of the time. And so they kind of go back to that when they need some stabilization. But most of the time, they hate they're not very fond of having that connection with their children or their spouse unless they're getting something out of it. So they may be inappropriate with their children. Their spouse may be financially supporting them, taking care of them, overlooking their indiscretions, because there's a lot of that too, where people are married and their spouses know that they're predators and they overlook that. But a lot of times, these men are typically lonely. They move alone. They commit their crimes and their indiscretions alone. They'll go to another location. They'll be out late at night, or they'll leave work during the day and be at the park where they can access children. A lot of times, and it's also not uncommon for them to be watching pornography while at the job. I mean, I've worked at several jobs now where people have gotten into serious trouble for watching pornography and infecting the IT computer system or something with like some sort of virus from that. But there's been several jobs where I've worked, including in corrections, where people have gotten in trouble for sexual indiscretions and being sexually inappropriate. And engaging in content that they're not supposed to be engaged in, all while being alone and sort of they can't control their impulsiveness. So men who engage in pedophilia, in deviant sexual behavior, they start out being alone and they continue being alone. They push people away to engage in the deviance because, what's done in the dark, right? And that's where they feel like they have the most freedom to get away with what they can get away with. It's why they go for people who are vulnerable, that are often going to, children that are vulnerable. So either they could have some sort of serious handicap. They're being raised by a single parent who's often not at home. Any number of things, or children who's they're just isolated, or they're in foster care, or they're being passed around from group home to group home, and so those are the things. So they usually commit their crimes when they're by themselves. It's I won't say it's rare, but they won't do it as frequently in front of other people. It may be some sort of deviation of it where they're always super flirty with everyone. They're always over sexualized in the comments that they make, or they're super fixated on a child in the home in terms of being an overly critical, overbearing, overly controlling, a jealous parent that doesn't want their child to date, right? Those sorts of things. So yes, I think there's a connection between male loneliness and pedophilia and or sexually deviant behaviors, but I think it actually starts in reverse. I think these men are usually, in my experience, people who start out alone, even if they're married and they have families. They commit their offenses in secret, and it just continues. You have to remember, or maybe you don't know, I think the one thing that you need to know is they don't see people as human beings, but they see them as objects that are there for their pleasure, that are there to be controlled, and there to be done with whatever they want to do with. So, that's how they look at it. They look at it as like an item. It's my possession. I can do with what I want. And I believe that I'm God. I believe that I have the right to do whatever I want to do and not suffer consequences.